Welcome back to Detective and Mystery Fiction. Join us on a journey through the pages of old, dusty detective pulp magazines. Before we begin, I invite you to pause for a moment and share in the comments where in the world you're listening from, and what time of day it is for you.
The Box in the Hold by H. Bedford Jones. The Black Mask. February 1932. Greg? Yes, sir? Greg paused in the cabin doorway. The skipper peered up at him from the desk in that queer way of his, as though he were afraid of this stalwart, level-eyed mate with the shock of black hair and shaggy black brows. "I don't like that chap Barker, mister. Keep your eye on him, and when you are figuring over them charts, tell him to lay off the bridge." "Yes, sir," said Greg. "Anything in particular wrong with him?" "There is," said the captain, his voice complaining and querulous. "He's the dead spit of a rascal that cheated me once, up to Hong Kong 6 years ago it was. A regular land shark. And I've never forgot him. You look out for this Barker." "Very good, sir," said Greg. He kept the contempt out of his voice, tucked the roll of charts under his arm, and left the cabin. On the bridge he found Watson, the second officer, who nodded sourly. "Well, any signs of life from the captain's quarters, Mr. Greg?" "Plenty," said Greg cheerfully. "I am expecting to hear of yellow elephants and pink monkeys any time now. Anyway, I've got the position and the charts. You'd better come in and lend your valued judgment to the matter." "I will that," said Watson. "Be along in 5 minutes." Greg went on to the chart room. Watson, of course, resented the fact that Captain Carson had stuck down in his cabin drunk most of the time after the first day out, leaving everything to his mates. Anyone would resent it, especially in view of the circumstances. Greg himself resented it keenly. In the chart room, Greg lighted his pipe, spread out the chart on the table, and pinned it down. The Clipperton was chugging along at 8 knots, heading into Apii Passage. Off to starboard rose the hills of Borneo's northwest coast. Far to the port were the white breakers and distant blue dots on the horizon, the first of the Natuna Islands that extended north in a ragged string of islands and reefs for nearly 200 miles, like a spike from the Borneo coast piercing the China Sea. Watson lounged in, took out his pipe and pouch, and dropped into a chair. "All's well," he said briefly. "Won't be nearing those 5-fathom patches for another hour yet. Ready with the dope?" His eyes touched curiously on the sealed envelope in Greg's hands, and the mate nodded. There was reason for Watson's curiosity, for the old skipper's maudlin uneasiness. Some weeks previously, a coasting junk pile and island trader named the Seacrest had gone to smash on the reefs off Sir Hassan Island. Some of her crew and one officer had got clear. The Dutch complot, the only white man on Sir Hassan, for the Natunas were Dutch-owned, had sent them to Singapore with a report confirming their story. The Seacrest was a total loss, but at the underwriter's sale, the wreck had been bid in by a group of men in Singapore. No one knew just why. This group had chartered the old Clipperton and sent her out, with their agent Barker aboard, together with a Scaphandre half-suit diving outfit, and a diver named Harper, a surly, odd sort of chap. There was a great deal of secrecy about the whole affair. Barker had been something of an island trader, a man who had knocked about the islands for years. The officers and crew of the Clipperton, with the exception of the black gang, were all white, but had been hurriedly recruited from hither and yon. All hands knew it was a charter to do some salvaging from a wreck on the Natunas, and this was precisely all that anyone knew from the skipper down. But the skipper received an intimation that it might be dangerous in some unexplained way, and involved a fortune that was not shown on the manifest of the wrecked steamer. So Captain Carson took to liquor and left all responsibility to his officers. "Here," said Greg as he tore at the envelope, "is what they gave the skipper. He was to open it when he got into Apia Passage, and he hasn't the guts to do it. He's scared of this Barker, too." "Barker's no angel," said Watson dryly. "But he's the owner's agent, and my guess is that he knows what he's after, but not the exact location of the wreck. The bearings given by that Dutch official don't mean a darn thing when you are looking for a ship through a maze of reefs." Greg produced a strip of paper and studied it. "Right you are," he said, and passed it over. "Nothing but a set of bearings. No doubt the survivors told the truth. They were making for Royalist Haven. It was in a blinding rain they piled up, you know, and instead of hitting the anchorage, hit the westward channel with nothing but coral reef and islets ahead. And they hit something sweet," said Watson, bending over the chart and laying a finger on the approximate position of the wreck. "Only navigable for boats, it says, and then only at high tide if you ask me. Don't you go heading for the haven in any blinking rain squall. Mount Cody bears about alike from either way, and I ain't anxious to pile up." Greg laughed a little and got out instruments and pencil. "We'll find she's sunk in a pocket of the coral," said Watson confidently. "Else why bring the diving helmet and the diver? Bet you it's 8 to 12 fathom anyhow. They'd have shipped a couple of native divers otherwise." "No, they wanted a man they could trust," commented Greg, and worked silently for a space. "Whoever took those bearings took good ones from every angle. Now for the last intersection there. Works out perfectly. She lies at the edge of the reef just under Coconut Island, south of the Gordons, a half-mile or so, 4 fathom marked." "Aye, and that's impossible," said Watson. "Old man say anything about anchorage?" "He said nothing about anything," returned Greg rather grimly. "I'll steam into Royalist Haven since that's sheltered. We'll not be having any bad weather now in September, but there is a more or less steady sou'east wind and we'll need to be well sheltered. We'll be off the haven, I make it, about 8 bells this afternoon, maybe a bit later," said Watson, rising. "I am taking half speed past those 5 fathom patches." "Right," said Greg. "I'll relieve you at 8 bells, or before if we get off the haven, and take her in. You have to get an exact bearing before entering, and again before making the anchorage." Watson nodded and was gone. The first officer had just refilled and lighted his pipe when another figure darkened the port doorway. He looked up to see Barker and waved his hand to a chair, making no attempt whatever to hide the outspread chart with its penciled lines. He was not at all afraid of this lean, bronzed, dark man whose eyes were steady as the eyes of a reptile and whose amiability masked a hard and purposeful efficiency. "Well," Greg said negligently, "I know where we're bound for. You know what we're after. What say we swap information? I am curious." Barker laughed amusedly as he surveyed the seaman. Something of what passed in his mind could be read in his look. Here was a rough fellow, a young chap who had worked his way up in a rough school. All rough corners. No social graces to him whatever. And Greg saw in Barker the sort who liked club verandas, long whiskey pegs with a pretty girl to share them, evening clothes, and the softer things of life. Not that he was soft himself, not for a minute, and reading all this in the careless survey, Greg took warning. Such a man was dangerous. "So you are curious, eh?" Barker repeated, without accepting the offer of a chair. "Yes, I suppose so. You are the one real man aboard this ship. Well, there is no harm in telling you. Your proposal is accepted, Mr. Greg. That's the position, eh?" His eyes, keen and sharp, struck down at the chart. I see. We'll have to leave the ship in Royalist Haven and go over to the wreck in boats." He straightened up and waved his hand. "Very good. So you are wondering what we're after, Mr. Greg? Then I'll tell you. Aboard that ship was a scoundrel, a thorough scoundrel, mind you. He's still aboard her, by the way. He was her captain, and like many ship's masters, opportunities of fortune, graft, cumshaw, came his way. Unlike most ship's masters, he accepted them. We're here to obtain a little box of cloisonné which is now in his cabin. A box not like any box you ever saw, 6 inches long, worth perhaps $100 gold in a tourist shop. And if we get it, Mr. Gregg, you and I may talk a little business. You are the one real man aboard here, I repeat, with the exception of myself." With a cool nod, Barker turned and went from the chart house, leaving Gregg staring after him. A ship chartered, men engaged, thousands of dollars spent. To obtain a box worth $100 at most. Gregg sniffed incredulously. He did not like the ironical tone of Barker. The whole thing was preposterous, yet he had the conviction that Barker spoke the truth. Gregg took the ship into the 600-yard channel leading between the reefs, into Royalist Haven. The skipper by this time was dead drunk in his bunk and breathing stertorously as the Chinese steward reported. They steamed in at slow speed, Mount Coty dead ahead in line with David Point, the high rocky hills of Surasan rising to the right, the shoals and islets off to the left. "Watch the detached rock off Clapper Hoke," Gregg cautioned the second officer, "when it bears 319 degrees in range with the northeast tip of the main Gordon." "Watching for it, sir," said Watson. "Coming right up now." A moment later, the ship swung slightly to port, passing within 50 feet of a coral bank that was barely awash even now at high tide. The engine ceased, fell into silence. The Clipperton forged ahead a trifle more. Then the anchor plunged sullenly and the chain clanked out through the hawse hole. Barker came up to the bridge, and Gregg turned to him. "If you are going to see the compteur, now's your time," he said. "At high water a boat can reach the wharf that comes out across the coral reef. The creek is around that curve of shore to starboard. He'll probably come aboard, though, if you leave him alone." Barker shrugged. "Let him come, then. One of those fishing boats we saw making in will probably fetch the Dutchman out to see about Praptique, and so forth, eh?" Gregg nodded. Half an hour later, indeed, with the sun almost at the western horizon, a boat appeared with a white umbrella in the stern, and the Dutch flag at the staff. Gregg rigged the ladder, and the conteur came aboard, an amiable little man, who was everything from port doctor to local magistrate for the little native village in the mangroves. He looked over their papers, called up all the men, touched each one, pronounced himself satisfied, and lingered for supper. As Gregg had already observed in approaching the haven, there was no sign of the wreck above water, and the Dutchman confirmed the supposition that she lay in a deep pocket of the coral just off the reef. "It is very bad water along there," he said with a shake of the head. "The natives will not go near it. I do not know why. They are afraid of all that stretch of water. It holds many such pockets along the reef proper, although the channels are all shallow. Some of the depths are astonishing. Once I tried one that the natives said is bottomless. I found bottom, but it was close to 800 fathom. "What?" exclaimed Gregg sharply. "Are you sure? Nearly a mile deep. Why, man, that doesn't seem credible for a pocket." The other shrugged. "I believe that there is some enormous fissure running along here, going far down into the ocean bottom," he said calmly. "An ancient fissure as old as the ocean above which the coral has gradually mounted. It is interesting as a scientific study, and I have already ordered the proper equipment to take soundings in all the pockets along the reef. Well, gentlemen, you will have no trouble with your wreck, for she lies in only 8 or 9 fathom. When you desire fresh water or fruit, send a boat to the village, and I will see that you are supplied." So he departed. In the cool starlight, Captain Carson had made his appearance at dinner in a shadowy sort of way, saying very little and looking all red and white, blotched and horrible. When the visitor had departed, Watson came and joined Gregg at the rail and grunted, "Old man's killing himself, mister. Bet you $1 he's dead inside 3 days. And did you notice how he looked at Barker? Couldn't keep his eyes off him. What do you think about this pocket theory of the Dutchman's? Anyway, I never heard of a mile deep except out at sea in the Big Fall. Don't look reasonable." "His theory is reasonable since there is more than one of these pockets," said Gregg. "What do you think about it, Barker?" The agent had approached them, cheroot tip glowing redly. "Anything's possible in seas and formations like these," he replied amiably. "I am glad I am not doing the diving here, that's all. If the natives are afraid of this water, then you can lay to it. They have some reason to be afraid." "What's there to be afraid of?" said Greg. "No sharks of any size inside these shallows, and sharks don't live in pockets." "Other things do," replied Barker. "Lots of other things along the edge of a coral reef. That's where all the slimy rascals hang out, from moray eels to devilfish. A big octopus always comes from deep water, you know. And at the breeding season they come in pairs." "Where the devil did you learn about the breeding season of octopuses?" demanded Watson with a chortle. "Octopi," corrected Barker genially. "Well, it's common knowledge. So's astronomy, but I don't know it." And the second officer laughed. The yellow steward approached Greg and touched his arm. "Mebso, you come quick," he said. "Him Captain velly sick. Say, forget you." "It's come," observed Watson calmly, as Greg departed in haste. He was right about that, too. It had come, as Greg knew, the moment he stood beside the skipper's berth and looked down at the poor broken old man. The queer part of it was that Captain Carson did not look a bit drunk. His eyes appeared sane and rested and sober. "Shut the door, Greg," he said in a faint voice. "Got to tell you something, that's right. She's your ship, mister. You watch out for that Barker. Something crooked about him, I tell you. He's playing some sharp game. Him and that Saunders between 'em." "There is no game they can play, Captain," said Greg. "Here, you let me feel your pulse." "No use," said the skipper composedly. "Can't do me no good." "But don't log the liquor. Like a good chap, leave me with a clean ticket for the sake of the missus, won't you?" "Trust me for that," said Greg. "You hold steady till I get a hypodermic." "Hold steady," said the skipper, and smiled, and died. Greg summoned the second officer. They arranged for the burial immediately. Day broke as Greg wanted to steam out of the bite before putting the body over the side. To log the death as due to heart failure was simple enough, and undoubtedly true. The old skipper had merely run down like a fast-driven machine. Barker and Saunders. Saunders, that hulking, heavy-jawed, silent fellow who had signed on from nowhere as assistant to grizzled old McIntyre, the chief engineer. Was this another hallucination, or could there really be anything up between the agent and the assistant engineer? McIntyre, the old chief, was extremely affected by the skipper's death, for Mac had sailed with him for years past. "I seen it coming," said Mac, as he smoked his pipe that night on the bridge. "Aye, this long while back I seen it comin', and I'll not be far behind him. Let me tell you, Captain Greg, it is now, eh? Well, I always says to the skipper that I'd hang on till he went, and then I'd be a few knots back of him when he made the last voyage." He shook his frail white head and puffed at his pipe. Barker and the diver, Harper, stood at the other end of the bridge talking together in low tones. Greg had the distinct impression that they were in dispute about something, though neither voice was lifted. He turned and approached them. "I wouldn't do it for 1,000 quid, he heard Harper say, then check himself abruptly as they noted his approach. Barker swung around to him. "Hello, Greg. Captain Greg now, isn't it?" "Sorry to say it is," replied Greg. "Can you tell me how long we're to be here, Barker? I am not sure if you were kidding me or not, the other day when you said—" "Oh, I know, cut in Barker swiftly, as though to prevent repetition of what he had said to Greg. "I was just discussing that with Harper, Captain. It depends altogether on how the wreck lies and what condition she's in. As soon as Harper has taken a look around, we can give you some idea of how long the job will last." "Fine," said Greg. "You'll tackle it in the morning then, right after the burial?" "You bet," said Barker. "Can't come too quick to suit us." The diver turned. "I understand, Captain Greg," he said, "that you've had experience in tending lines. They told me that when I signed on for the job." "Yes, some," replied Greg. Not much, but perhaps enough to serve our turn here. And I know Mr. Watson was with a pearler for a year down on the northwest coast, so we'll be able to run the gauges and lines properly." "Thanks," said Harper. "I'll feel better if I know you are at the lines, sir." Greg assented and passed on. Yet some subtle intonation of the diver's voice lingered with him. Of course divers had to trust the men who tended their lines. Perhaps that explained it. But what was it that Harper would not take £1,000 to do? Was Barker playing some deep game here? The old skipper might have been right after all. Dying men usually are right in the things they half know, half sense. With sunrise, the Clipperton slipped out beyond the haven into deeper water, and there the skipper's body was slid over to its last repose, and the ship steamed back again to her anchorage. Breakfast over, the big life raft was unshipped and launched. The diving gear was broken out. With the 6 men at the oars, the No bore us. One boat took the raft in tow. Greg and Barker and the diver helped to load down the boat, Greg standing in the bow to watch for coral, while Barker took the tiller. Skirting the edge of the main coral bank, enclosing all these islets, they entered the break between Pariun and Haji, which the officers of the ill-fated Seacrest must have mistaken in the driving rain on that night of the wreck for the entrance into the haven. Avoiding the outflung jaw of coral which must have ripped the bottom out of the doomed ship, they went on to the point where she now lay, according to the findings. There was no sign of her. The oars dipped slowly in the slight depth, varying from 1 to 4 fathom. Greg could see every detail of the bottom, the fishes darting below the boat's shadow, the faintly streaming seaweed of coral growths, the branching forest-like forms of the coral itself. To right and left, jutted from the water, the rocky pinnacles of the islands. Then suddenly Greg ordered the oars up. The boat and raft floated quietly, for there was no current here. They were at the indicated spot below. The water showed clear blue, indicating great depth, thinning again to greenish 100 feet away, where the reef curved outward again. Within this indentation, not above 300 feet across, was the deep pocket. The sun had risen high by this time. With the hot rays behind him, Greg looked down as the boat slowly floated across the surface of the water. A sudden exclamation broke from him. "See her, Harper?" "Aye," came the response. They could see her now quite plainly. Even here, with some 60 feet of depth, everything was clear at the bottom and distinct. That is to say, where the wreck lay. Out from her, a little way, things wavered and lost shape. Deeper there. "Not half bad," exclaimed the diver, leaning over in the stern sheets. "Laying on her port side. Starboard rail ain't more'n 30 foot down. Nothing to this at all, gents. 6 to 8 fathom work, and she's clean, too. Coral bottom, sure. Ripped the whole bow out of her getting here. Outer reef did that, stripped away her keelson and half her plates." What's over to port, here?" "Deep," spoke up Barker. "Looks deep there." "Lord, she's on a shelf, Harper." Greg perceived that this was the case, very probably. The wreck lay upon a shallower ledge, and beyond that ledge was a great drop into the depths, not wide across perhaps, but all the more singular for that. "Well," said Harper, "let's get to work." In his tone was a vague stirring as of doubt or apprehension. Greg recalled it later. By the time the pumps were rigged on the catamaran and pressure was in the tank, Watson came along in another boat rowed by 6 of the Chinese black gang. Watson understood the complicated gauges of the English outfit, and in no time at all was thoroughly in charge, while Greg tended the lifeline. Harper, belting a long knife about him, got into the half-suit, went over the side, and signaled to be let down. All was well. They could see his figure distinctly, every move apparent as he descended. Then a sharp exclamation broke from Watson. "See that, Greg? By jollies, there is more current than usual down there." Submarine currents were strong all along the reefs, naturally, but the gyrations of the diver as he descended gave evidence of unusually strong eddies near the wreck. He seemed as though hurled about in a violent wind. However, he reached the wreck at last and paused. The Sea Crest lay with her keel, or what had been her keel, towards the reef, her superstructure, towards the great precipice that shot down into unknown depths. Presently Harper signaled for more line and clawed his way to her starboard passage and vanished. The lines paid out regularly, indicating that he was meeting with no obstacle. Then came a halt and a signal that he was all right. "He's found the cabin," muttered Barker, more to himself than to the others. Greg flung a glance at the man and was astonished at the tense excitement of Barker's visage as he gazed down at the scene below. That dark, hard countenance was streaming with perspiration, was set in breathless suspense, seemed almost agonized by the tension of the man's concentration. Here was no concern for a diver's safety. Here was no mere agent's worry over the outcome of operations not interesting him. Here was complete personal absorption, a rally of every faculty, a man's utter life and death suspense. Why? The query remained unanswered. At this depth, of course, a diver could remain down indefinitely without danger. The time passed occasionally. Greg signaled, and Harper immediately responded that all was well. The lines and air hose had not been fouled. Everything was as it should be. Yet a feeling of uneasiness crept over Greg. He began to wish desperately that the diver would come out of there and ascend. Barker from time to time wiped the sweat out of his eyes and resumed his ceaseless staring. The sun beat down upon the glassy, unruffled water with fearful force. The men at the pumps had stripped. The other boat lay nearby with the Chinese stokers watching the depths, likewise with an impersonal, unconcerned air. It seemed ages that Harper remained invisible, apparently immobile. Actually, it was only a trifle over half an hour. Then came the signal. The lines came in slowly, steadily, and then Harper came into sight, carrying a burden under one arm. He was drawn from the almost perpendicular deck, was tossed about by the invisible currents. Over to the left, something seemed to fill the vasty deep of the pocket. Something shapeless and formless, gigantic, inchoate, appeared to be present there. Greg looked directly at it and found nothing. A trick of the brain, perhaps, or some play of the sunlight upon the depths. The diver was brought up steadily, with the proper pauses, but at this slight depth there was no danger of the bends, and he was soon being lifted aboard the raft with his burden. When his helmet came off, he met the tense, strained look of Barker and nodded. "Right where you said," he observed, indicating a plain box of wood, a foot square, which he had brought up with him. It was passed to Barker, who laid it aside in the bottom of the boat with apparent negligence. Only Greg observed that the man's hands were positively trembling with eagerness. Only Greg perceived the tremendous effort by which Barker forced himself to restraint. "Going down again?" asked Greg as Harper stretched out on his back, resting. "Not right now," said the diver. "I've got to get into the strong room, but that means blowing in the door. Not only is the steel door locked, but it's fast jammed and buckled by the twisting of the hull. We'll come back and do it this afternoon. I have everything needed." "Right," said Greg. "Then we'll leave the raft and pumps moored here. Better pass over that tarp from the stern, Watson, and cover up the gear and air hose from the sun. Take Harper back in your boat when he's ready, and we'll hit for the ship." He noticed now that the 6 men at the oars of his boat were all watching intently. Watching, not him or the diver, but Barker and the wooden box in the stern. He joined Barker and took the tiller, and a moment later the oars dipped, and they began to move towards the ship. Sitting there beside the silent Barker, looking at the 6 men who faced towards him, Greg realized suddenly how silent they had been during all this while. They had indulged in little horseplay, had spoken infrequently. One would have said that they too were utterly absorbed in what was going on, yet it should have meant nothing to them, except a relief in the monotony of shipboard work. And now, returning, they one and all appeared to be consumed by a suppressed excitement. It was, to say the least, singular. When they came back to the ship, they found Saunders, the big, hard-faced assistant engineer, leaning over the rail, smoking his pipe and eyeing them with his sullen manner. "Captain Gregg," he said as Gregg came over the rail, "you might take a look at the chief, if you will. I don't know if the sun got him or what. He's in his berth, talking wild." Dropping everything else, Gregg sought the chief engineer's cabin. There he found the yellow steward applying cold compresses to the old chief's head. McIntyre was purple in the face and lay there motionless, but muttering away under his breath as he stared up with wide eyes. He did not reply to Gregg's queries, seemed not to know Gregg was present. The steward had found him this way half an hour ago and knew nothing about the cause. His rambling talk was all of Tyneside and Scotland. Obviously he had had a seizure of some sort, and looking down at him, Gregg reflected that his prediction might be only too true. Knowing that Barker had knocked about everywhere and had all sorts of experience, he went to the door of the agent's cabin and rapped sharply. "Who's there?" came Barker's voice, astonishing in its suspicion and anger. "Captain Gregg." "Oh, half a minute, then." Presently Barker unlocked the door, did not open it, but stood peering out. "Would you mind coming and taking a look at the chief?" said Gregg. "He's had some sort of attack, and it's past me. You might be able to identify it." "Right," said Barker, but with a frown that told of acute irritation. "I'll be along in half a jiffy. Join you in his cabin." He closed the door again and locked it. Gregg turned away, repressing an oath of anger at the manner of the man. There was something, the box. Barker had it in his care, of course, and probably was examining it. Naturally, he would not like being disturbed. 5 minutes later, Barker, standing at the side of the berth, completed his swift survey of McIntyre, who had ceased his muttering and lay staring up with wide eyes. "Stroke of some sort, looks to me," said the agent. "You notice he seems unable to move his arms or legs. Undoubtedly a stroke hit him. He may last this way for days, or he may go out all in a minute. As I understand it, depends entirely on the breaking of blood vessels around the brain." "Nothing to do for him?" Barker shrugged. "Someone will have to stand by, that's all. By the way, about the work, Harper says he'll have to blow in the strong room door. He'll do that this afternoon and take a look inside. It appears that the owners want a report on what's there." "We can jerk everything out of her in no time," said Gregg. "Well, see what Harper says," returned the other evasively. "Maybe nothing. By the way, Gregg, I wish you'd do something for me. You know what the Dutchman was saying about opium. They're ashore, so much of it. I'm going to take a few tins back to Singapore. I can pick it up here dirt cheap and smuggle it in easily enough. Naturally, I couldn't keep you from knowing about it. Keep your mouth shut, like a good chap, and it'll be worth your while." Gregg surveyed him ironically. "You couldn't make it worth my while, Barker," he said. "Eh?" The other looked at him, surprised. "Mean to say you wouldn't do it?" "Exactly that. But man alive, I never dreamed you were so puritanical." "Puritanical, hell," said Gregg. "You missed the point. I don't care what you do, so long as I am not concerned. I am not your keeper. But when you tell me about it, then I am made a party to the business. That's different." "How is it different?" asked Barker with a keen look. "Involves my ticket, my duty, my job," said Gregg. "Involves my self-respect too, but leave that out of it. For practical reasons, I'll not risk having a black mark against my license or my reputation. That's the one thing a man has for which he is wholly responsible, and mine remains clean." Said Barker, and smiled. "I see your viewpoint all right, and I am not arguing against it. I am satisfied, but just for instance, would such a decision still hold good if some big thing were involved? Suppose, instead of talking about a few dollars, some chap came and talked £1,000, or 2,000, or 10,000, enough, say, to set you up for life somewhere. I am merely curious to know what your reaction would be, you see. Not your righteous ship's officer's pose, but your real honest reaction. Seems to me that'd be worthwhile, wouldn't it?" "Are you proposing such a thing?" asked Gregg bluntly. Barker laughed. Lord, no. I am merely trying to get at your psychology. I should think you'd grab at it. Think again then, said Greg. From a standpoint of dollars and cents, it might be worthwhile, yes. Not when one's self-respect is considered by Ginger. I want to be able to look myself in the face every morning. A sneak thief can't do that with any luck. Hell, I'd break any law that took my fancy, but not the law of self-respect. Barker shrugged. Well, I don't savvy it. Don't expect you would. Eh? The other swung around. What do you mean by that, Greg? Greg met his angry eyes. Exactly what I say. No two men have the same notion about what's right and wrong, have they? Well, I don't appreciate your tone by a good deal. I don't care a damn what you appreciate, said Greg flatly. We'll do our job here without any quarreling and get back to Singapore. Nothing to quarrel about anyhow. If you want to buy some mud ashore and sneak it back, that's your business and not mine. I'd not skreel on you, but don't expect me to be in on the job. Right. Barker nodded, and his face cleared. I see your point, Captain, so we'll not go into the matter any further. Forget it. Greg took up the job of remaining with the stricken chief, in order to relieve the steward for work. Watson, he decided, could relieve him at noon, and the steward could take over when they left to resume diving operations. As he sat there, occasionally changing the cold compresses, Greg thought of his conversation with Barker. Something more than a bit of smuggled opium behind it, he felt convinced. What was it that the diver had said on the bridge last night? Something he wouldn't do for 1,000 quid. What had Barker proposed to him? That talk about opium was all one big bluff, decided Greg. He was feeling me out in regard to something else, that's what he was doing. Yes, sir. The old skipper had the right hunch about that chap. Barker's got some dirty work up his sleeve. So convinced was he of this theory that upon being relieved by Watson, he went to his cabin and looked up the automatic pistol he had packed aboard. To his astonishment, it was clean gone. He unlocked the skipper's cabin and found a pistol with cartridges to fit and tucked it away under his mattress. Now he had something more than theory to think about. Somebody had stolen the pistol from his cabin, and he felt the theft was connected with Barker in some way. What the agent might have in mind, what rascality he might be planning, was clear past Greg. But now he was definitely suspicious. The loss of that pistol showed him that something was going to happen, and he would be just out of luck if he were not prepared for it. Things happened this afternoon, however, which were certainly not down in anybody's calculations. Greg remembered, from their hot journey to the raft, that Barker had said previously that if the cloisonné box were found, he might talk business to Greg. Had it been found, Barker had said nothing about the wooden box fetched up by Harper. His blind about the opium was undoubtedly an approach to the business he had meant. Now that he was assured of Greg's position, he would probably not broach anything further. The agent did not accompany them this trip. The diver, Harper, had made ready some gelinite charges, with a small battery and coils of wire. Obviously, he had come prepared for anything. I'll go down and place the charges, he said to Greg and Watson, as they approached the raft. Then I'll come up and set 'em off. Wait for 20 minutes to let her do any settling, and go down and take stock. If there is anything in that strong room, we can get it out. You see, we don't know what might be there. And did a syndicate buy in the wreck? Said Greg dryly, not knowing whether anything worthwhile was aboard her. Search me, Captain, returned the diver with a shrug. Some of her cargo was well worthwhile salvaging, I believe, and I was to make reports on the No-2 hold especially, but that's all off. Her cargo is scattered all over the bottom of these reefs and passages. There hardly seems to be anything down yonder when the bottom was ripped off her. The package stuff just plumped out. Greg decided he would have a chat with Harper that night and discovered just what Barker had proposed to the diver. Then, to his surprise, Harper turned to him and mentioned that very conversation. "That Barker's a queer owner's agent," he said abruptly. "Derned if he didn't want me to get him the captain's papers. In that box I got and then quit the whole thing. Report her not worth salvaging in cargo or strongroom." "Is he crooked?" "All things are possible," said Greg. "Why do you shoot out a question like that?" "Well, you are straight," said the diver. "Anybody can see that. But I have my own notions about some other people. I've been wanting to have a talk with you." "Not here, then," said Greg promptly, jerking a thumb at the men and Watson in the bow. "Tonight's the time." "Right." The discussion was at once abandoned, but Harper's words gave Greg very satisfactory food for thought. With evening he would know something, would have something on which to act, if action became necessary. And, he reflected, with grim amusement, he would certainly have some fun with Barker. Upon reaching the catamaran, the pumps were rigged and pressure established. Without loss of time, Harper got into his outfit and descended. The afternoon was partly gone. Under the perpendicular rays of the sun, the wreck below was even more clearly visible than in the morning. The diver took his charges with him, paying out the wire as he went down. This wire was not connected with the battery as yet. It was heavily insulated, waterproof. The deeper portion of the pocket to the left of the shelf on which the wreck lay showed translucent and clear, apparently bottomless. "He's down," said Watson, as the signal came back to them. They could see Harper clawing his way to the entry beneath the bridge. Then he vanished from sight. The lines were paid out slowly. He signaled all well, and came to a halt, evidently having reached the strong-room door. After a pause, he signaled, and was presently coming up to the surface. "Nasty job keeping the hose from fouling on that wire," he observed when his helmet was off. "Everything's set. Give me the battery and wire, and stand by." When he was ready, he glanced at Greg, received a nod, and pressed the key. The wreck far below gave a jarring motion, then everything was clouded from sight by sand and coral mud. The boat heaved violently as the muffled report sounded. "All hands knock off to enjoy the cool sunlight," said Greg, lighting his pipe and pulling his cap over his eyes. "No use trying to find any shade on these islands, so we may as well grin and bear it. Wonder how the chief's getting along?" "He'll kick out," said Watson casually. The time dragged. Gradually the water below them lost its roiled appearance and became clear, but only by slow degrees. After a bit, Greg beckoned to Harper and pointed down. "Does it look queer to you?" The diver stared down. The depths seemed clear enough now of sand and debris. The wreck apparently had not changed position. Yet the water had an odd, murky look. "Like ink was in it, eh?" Harper started suddenly, leaned over. "Ink, that's exactly it, Captain. There is a squid down there, or an octopus somewhere around the ship, and the blast stirred up the critter. Then you'll not go down again now, I suppose?" "Ha!" Harper turned and grinned. "Me stay up on account of a squid? Don't worry, Cap'n. I've met up with those devils more than once. Can't say I like 'em, but this isn't deep enough to hold any very big ones. They always hang out at the edge of a reef, you know. They like an up-and-down wall with holes in it for hiding places. If there was any big fellow down there, I might think twice about it, but the big ones stay down in dark, deep water. So I'll slip over right now. All set, Watson. Get the needle up and I'll go." The pumps were set to work, and presently Harper was over the edge and dropping down through the depths. Greg, tending the lines, watched those depths narrowly all around the wreck, but could see not the least sign of danger, except that the water continued dark and murky. Watson, who had also observed this condition, wagged his head soberly. "Looks to me," he said, "like that black stuff was coming up from the deep hole over yonder. So much current down below that you can't see the drift of it, though." Greg frowned uneasily, and wished Harper had not gone. He remembered now about the natives being afraid of these reef pockets. Beyond a few fish brought to the surface by the explosion, nothing was in sight. and the sun-shot depths of coral around the wreck showed no menace. Harper was down now, slowly making his way through the wreckage of the cabin passage, and was out of sight. The air hose got foul, but after a minute Harper signaled all. "Well, looks to me," said Watson abruptly, "like the murk is getting thicker, Captain. And if we— my God, look, what's that there thing? A snake." In his excitement he dropped the air hose, then caught it up again. Greg looked down. The cloud in the water was certainly getting darker, but he was looking at the thing which Watson had seen. This was a moving gray streak, which seemed to be coming from nowhere and moving into the passage on the trail of Harper. It was no snake, however. It seemed no more than a thin, shadowy substance. "There is another." A frenzied yell burst from Watson. "4 jerks, quick!" Shouts, oaths, exclamations of terror burst from the watching men. Greg had already given the emergency signal of 4 jerks. Even as Watson spoke, he also had seen that second wavering gray thing. And behind the two, somewhere in those murky depths, a huge and shapeless form, as though the whole ocean bottom were moving up slavishly. It was a giant octopus, rising from the depths. "Tail on these lines!" Greg's voice leaped at the men, and they obeyed with a scramble. "Careful of that air hose!" They caught hold and pulled, only to look at Greg from frightened faces. "It's caught, sir. It don't come." The lines fouled. Greg, suddenly in a fearful cold sweat, handled the lines, made a signal. There was no response. Then came a distinct, slow tug at the line, a continuous pull wrenching it out of his hand. He caught it again. The other men seized it, set their weight upon it. The terrific pull continued. They braced themselves. The line snapped. Watson was screaming incoherently like a man in delirium tremens, flailing with both hands at the air. Greg looked down stonily, fighting off the spasm of fearful horror that threatened to overwhelm his senses. Where the forward part of the wreck had been was a formless blot. All the water was murky. Now this blot was the mass of the monstrous devilfish that had come up above the edge of the wreck. Its tentacles had seized upon the lifeline, reaching out to find the man there inside the wreck. Another of the men screamed out horribly. Greg nodded. Up through the water came a long rush of iridescent bubbles to burst at the surface. Harper was done for, his helmet crushed in. To stand here and know that the man was dying, dead, there in the depths, and to be entirely helpless, was horrible. Greg looked at the men. Watson was in a hysterical spasm. The others were cursing, screaming, or stupefied with sheer fright. "Silence," ordered Greg, and his voice lashed through their panic. They looked curiously at his immobile, harsh features. Only the deepened lines in his face showed what the effort at calmness was costing him. Greg drew his knife out, leaned over, and slashed at the air hose. The severed end went curling and spiraling away through the water. Watson cursed him, and with one buffet he knocked the second officer flat. "Harper's dead," he said, his voice rising with a curious calm effect over the storm of oaths and wild cries. "When that air went out of his helmet he was dead, probably was squeezed. Better for him to stay where he is." "Well, blasted, get us out of here," yelled one of the men frantically. "It's coming up at us, I tell you." Greg glanced over the side. The wreck was hidden now. Everything was hidden in a flood of murky black. "Cut the moorings of the raft and take it in tow," he said. "Never mind bringing up the kedge anchor." The men worked frantically and then fell to the oars in frenzied panic. Watson was white as a sheet now, all a tremble, and even the calmly curious stare of Greg could not reach through his horror. As they drew away from the spot, however, he gradually came to himself. "I am sorry, Cap'n," he mumbled to Greg, when they were outside the fringing reef and headed for the ship in Royalist Haven. It sort of got me." "It got all of us," said Greg calmly. "I am coming back and blow that devil out of the water, if there is any more explosive in Harper's stuff." "Good." Watson rallied instantly. "Good. I am with you, Cap'n. Good Lord, I'll see that gray shape rising through the water to the last day I live." Greg reflected ironically that Watson would probably have some excuse to seek the soothing effects of opium each night. After this, as they came over the rail, Barker met them. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Harper heard you chaps yelling like mad, not done for." Greg nodded. "Octopus, a monster. We're going to dynamite him." "Good," exclaimed Barker. "Count me in, poor chap, but I say, Cap'n, Harper didn't go alone, you know. The old chief checked out while you were gone." Greg made a helpless gesture and turned towards the cabins. Behind him, the eyes of Barker went to the second officer, and then, going to Watson's side, he spoke softly, rapidly. 5. Going below. Greg found that Barker had reported truly. The old chief had died in his sleep, quietly, peacefully. Summoning 2 of the men from forward, Greg ordered the body prepared for burial, then went to the cabin Harper had occupied. He had not far to look. The diver had brought a plentiful supply of gelinite wire, fuses, everything necessary. As he made ready, there in the cabin of the dead man, Greg reflected on the series of fatal incidents. None of them had been avoidable. Each death had come without any human intervention. That of Harper, frightful and horrible as it appeared, had actually been the most merciful, for the diver had died the instant his helmet glass was broken. He might have been flung from his feet, might have dashed the glass against the passage wall, might never have suspected the presence of the monstrous octopus. The odd thing about these deaths to Greg was that they caused not a ripple of passing interest to the other men aboard. Watson, though fearfully shaken by what had just taken place at the wreck, was entirely callous to the fact of death itself. Barker appeared quite unmoved. Saunders. Just where was the sullen engineer? "I'd better have a word with him," thought Greg, gathering up his stuff into a neat bundle. "Anyhow, there'll be no more diving. Whatever is down there in the wreck will now remain there, so far as this ship's concerned." In the passage, he encountered Saunders and checked the sullen engineer with a word. "How soon can you get up steam, Chief?" "In an hour, sir. The fires weren't drawn, you know." "Better see about it then. We'll pull out of here by sunset." "Very good, sir." In his own cabin, Greg changed into fresh whites, then slipped a hand beneath his mattress and got out the pistol he had hidden there. He slipped this into his hip pocket, where its bulk would not be visible under his jacket, and proceeded on deck. He found Watson and Barker standing at the rail together. By the gangway, 4 men were still in the boat waiting. "Both of you going along?" he said, and they nodded. "Then take an oar apiece, will you? 2 of the men are attending to Mac's body." Barker shrugged and assented. Watson led the day down to the boat, and a moment later the boat put out, with Greg at the tiller. "No sign of anything above the surface?" he asked. "We were watching," replied Barker. "Didn't see a thing. The devil didn't break water." Greg indicated his bundle. "Harper had some pipe here all fixed up. I brought along several sections, explosive charge in each, with a time fuse, light the fuse, plug up the end, and down she goes. It's simpler than the battery and wire, especially for deaths." "We'll see something happen. That first discharge caused everything?" asked Barker. Greg nodded. "Stirred up the depths considerably and fetched up the monster." "Well, things have worked out for you, haven't they?" Barker gave him a quick, direct look. "How do you mean? In what way?" Greg's lips curved in a thin smile, but there was no mirth in his eyes. He was thinking that the diver would never have that chat with him now. "Dash it, man," went on Barker, after a moment of silence. "Just what are you driving at?" "I don't savvy you a bit." "We'll go into it later," said Greg, with a calm restraint that infuriated the other man. "By the way, did you find everything you expected in that box?" "Yes," said Barker curtly. He did not speak again. His bronzed, lean features were like hard mahogany. Greg thought of something. Just here. Singular that it had not occurred to him before this, but now things were coming clearer. Captain Carson had been worried about Barker. Why? Because some proposal had been made him. He had seen disaster ahead, or dishonor inescapable, and had drunk himself to death over it. Question is, just what does this rascal want? Queried Greg, inwardly wondering at the whole affair. I can't see where he has any opening for bribery, any reason or excuse. Yet he's certainly got something on hand. All those fellows were so confounded eager about that box, too. Am I the only man aboard who isn't in on the game? No time now to think of all this, however. They had arrived over the wreck. Watson, staring down through the clear water, uttered a sharp exclamation. The others craned over the side. Greg presently made out a shapeless gray thing blotting the forward part of the wreck. Our friend is still there, he observed. See him, Barker? A low whistle of amazement broke from the agent. Tremendous, that gray mass, that's it, eh? Doesn't seem possible, Cap'n. Do you know the thing could shoot itself up out of the water in the fraction of a second? What? Exclaimed the second officer, startled. You mean that octopus could swim? Hell no, Barker laughed. I mean what I say. The creature has a hydraulic suction arrangement that makes it absolutely the fastest thing in the ocean. That's its great defense against sharks. It can move twice as fast as a shark can swim. Good Lord, Watson paled. Suppose it darts up at us then, in that case. And Barker chuckled. Somebody collects our insurance. But cheer up, all hands. It won't come to the surface unless forced. Here, catch hold and stop talking so much, exclaimed Greg. He passed each of the others a 2-foot length of pipe with corks cut to fit. I'll take no chances on fluking this job. These all have different fuse links. We'll light 'em at the same time, cork 'em up, and drop 'em over. There is plenty air in the pipe to keep the fuses burning. Then I suggest that we put in the oars and go away. You are ruddy well right, said Barker cheerfully. Say when. Greg himself prepared 2 of the lengths of pipe, gave the word quietly, held a match to the fuses. Swiftly, he corked the pipes and sent them over the side. As the other 2 men followed suit, the boat was, at this moment, directly above the forward portion of the wreck. Swiftly the oars dipped, and all 6 rowers strained at the ash, not attempting to hide their anxiety to get out of reach of the monster below. Greg uttered a grim laugh. Then abruptly behind them came a heaving eruption of the water, followed by a quick succession of muffled explosions, 3 almost together with a 4th a few seconds later. A sharp cry burst from the men. Something long and thin, like a great snake, flung up out of the water, thrashed the air, and then was gone again. Quiet ensued. Row over there, commanded Greg. Do you hear me pull? It's all over. He came up to the surface in one final spasm, threw out a tentacle, and that was all. Row! My lord, it was 50 foot long! Exclaimed Watson, tugging at his oar. More like 30, said Greg calmly. The second officer stared at him. Are you made o' stone or what? You are no more worked up now than you were before, when I got harbor. Greg smiled a little and looked at Barker, finding the man's gaze curiously on him. You are unduly nervous, mister, he replied, and his eyes wrinkled up whimsically. We'd best all have a good drink when we get back, then get out of the haven and get squared away on our course. Got to bury poor old Mac, too. Well, here we are. Way enough. Lie on your oars and take a look. The boat drifted. Over the side they craned once more, and nervously enough, too, below. The clear water was badly roiled. However, Greg fancied that he could see an enormous grayish mass, slowly drifting. He could not be certain of it, though he was certain enough about the effect of the bombs. Let's get away, exclaimed Watson, strained and agonized. Right, said Greg. Pull. Odd that the dead brute wouldn't come to the surface. The oars dipped quickly and the boat shot away. You wouldn't find any dead octopus at the surface, said Barker. He'd die slowly and would dart back to the bottom and cling there. Not even death would loosen the tentacles. No one else spoke on the way back. Smoke was pouring from the funnels of the ship, and Saunders was evidently getting steam up fast. When they came aboard, Greg ordered the men to get the boat and life raft stowed again, then invited Barker and Watson to his cabin for a drink. Encountering Saunders, they pulled him along and celebrated the occasion with a stiff one all around. "And now, mister," Greg said, clapping Watson on the shoulder, "get along up forward and fetch in the hook. Then join me on the bridge. Saunders, you'll have to make the best of things in the engine room. No relief for you now." "That'll be all right, sir," said the hulking engineer. For an instant his eyes went to Barker, and Greg caught the look. "Then let's be off out of here, and on our way." Presently the Clipperton was standing slowly out into Apia Passage, then hove to while all hands were mustered. Greg read the burial service, and the body of McIntyre was slid over into the sunset-reddened depths of the China Sea. When the ship was again under way, Watson came up to the bridge. Greg saw him mounting the ladder and went out to meet him, beyond earshot of the man at the binnacle. Greg checked the other and gave him a swift, direct look. "Well, mister," he said incisively, "is it true that Saunders has come into the job too?" Unsettled as Watson had been this day, the shock was a bad one. He stared at Greg, his face going dead white, and what he found in those hard, uncompromising blue eyes beneath their shaggy black brows gave him no reassurance whatever. How did you know?" Greg laughed a little. "You poor fish. Didn't you know I was in on the game?" Relief unspeakable flooded into Watson's features. "Oh? Then it's all right," he blurted out. "I thought you'd turned it down." "Yeah? And what did you think was going to happen if I'd turned it down?" "I don't know." Watson's eyes shifted away. "And didn't give a damn either, eh?" said Greg. "Now listen here, mister, and pin back your ears. You given the whole show away. Savvy? I am not in on your damn bribery work, and I am not going to be in on it. Neither are you. Neither are the men. Understand me." Watson's pallor returned and his eyes bulged at Greg. "What?" he stammered pitifully. "What? But you just said—" "Come out of it," broke in Greg harshly. "You heard me. And you'd better believe me, mister. You set up here on the bridge and you stick here. And don't open your yap to the wheelman. And don't leave the bridge till you get orders. And God help you if you disobey me. Lay a course for Singapore, understand? Smack for the Straits, in with you." Watson shrank past him. Greg took the pistol from his hip, shifted it to his jacket pocket, and went down to look up Barker. He encountered the yellow steward, who summoned him to mess, with word that Barker and Saunders were awaiting him there, and he nodded grimly as he followed. 6. Joining the other two men at the table. Greg nodded and took the captain's place at the head. He flung Barker a whimsical smile. "I want to have a bit of a chat with you when we've eaten," he said. "It'll be dark by that time." "What about?" said Barker. Greg chuckled and decided to plunge. "About the course. Watson was just having a word with me, understand?" Barker surveyed him and whistled softly, his keen eyes narrowing. "So," he said, while Saunders gaped at him in half-startled surprise. "So." Greg nodded cheerfully. "Just so. But let's not talk about it now." "What's this? A real curry? Fine. What's the game?" demanded Barker. Greg looked at him with twinkling eyes. "That's what I've decided to find out. Might be worthwhile." "Oh." The agent shrugged. "Fair enough, Captain. Fair enough." Greg noted the significant glance that Barker, after a moment, shot at the engineer. Something was up sure enough, and by taking the offensive he had got a bit ahead of Barker's plans, whatever they might be. The meal passed off without incident. Greg told the steward to take a tray to the bridge for Watson. By the time they had finished, evening had come and the lights were turned on. Saunders rose and left the table. With a growl about his engines, Barker produced cheroots and shoved one at Greg, who accepted with a nod of thanks. "Want to come to my cabin?" asked the agent. "Might as well. The box is there, isn't it?" Barker grinned and led the way. When they reached his cabin, he turned on the light. "I gather," he said, "that you've thought over your refusal to consider anything." Greg laughed. "I am waiting to hear something of interest, if you want to put it that way. But you'd have to come clean if it's as big a thing as Watson let on." "Watson, that fool doesn't know the half of it," said Barker contemptuously. "You are different. You're a real man. I'll come across with the goods, and you'll see. Here is the box that the diver fetched up from his first trip." He produced the square wooden box and slid back the lid, to produce an object voluminously wrapped in fragments of old brocades and silks. A carved stand of red teak came to light, then the bit of cloisonné for which it had been made. This Barker set on the stand and put it on the chair beside his berth. "There you're," he said, a glitter of eager triumph in his eyes. Greg beheld what appeared to be 3 6-inch cylinders, one on top of the other two. The enamel and gold-fired bronze represented in effect 3 sacred Buddhist scrolls, complete even to the pins holding the binding strings in place. "You call that thing a box?" he asked. Barker chuckled. "Yes. You never saw one like it either. It was made originally, I presume, to hold 3 sacred law books. Now it holds something else. If you press the ends a bit, the covers lift off, like this. Catch hold." Greg caught the topmost cylinder. As Barker pressed at the ends, it came off in his hand, and the other 2 showed themselves loose. Within the 3 long troughs, thus brought to light, there lay a scintillating glitter of green fire. Greg caught his breath sharply. "My lord," he exclaimed, "not emeralds, not real ones, nothing else but," said Barker jubilantly. "That's the great emerald collection of the Procom, Watt in Siam. Been hundreds of years in the forming. It disappeared last year, after an earthquake knocked over the old temple." Greg knew nothing about precious stones, but needed to know nothing. He picked up some of the green baubles. They were of all shapes and sizes, but mostly large, and of the most superb deep green imaginable. He had heard that fine emeralds were vastly more valuable than diamonds, and could well believe it. "How to get aboard that craft?" he demanded. "Who does it belong to now?" "Whoever has it," said Barker. "I told you the skipper of the Seacrest was crooked. He took this aboard in Saigon, thinking the box held opium tins. A Chinese shipped it with him to be kept in his own cabin. Naturally, they wouldn't tell him the actual contents. He was to deliver it to a chap in Singapore, just as he had delivered other things. That's why our syndicate bid in the wreck. I was sent along to take care of this and let everything else slide. They had to let me in on the know, and offered me £5,000 if I landed it safely." Grunted the staring Greg. "What's it all worth? Any guess you want to make? Say, $500,000 gold?" "The Siamese have offered £20,000 for the return of the collection intact. So there is no great reason why I should be content with a bare 5,000, is there?" Greg replaced the stones he had taken out and leaned back. "Oh, I see," he observed. "And what's your idea about it? Why have you let in most of the officers and crew of this blasted hooker on your secret?" "I haven't," said Barker. "That is, they don't know just what it is, or its value. Enough of the crew will divide £1,000 among them, and the same to Saunders and Watson. He told you the crew were in on it, eh?" "He didn't need to," returned Greg dryly. "I guessed why spend so much money to buy silence and help. Instead of returning to Singapore, Take the ship into Macassar or Kuching, or anywhere I can get a Dutch boat to Batavia. Break down the engines. I disappear. You get back to Singapore in time, tell a likely yarn. And that's that. You yourself will get 2,000 pounds in cash before I leave you. See? Said Greg reflectively. That's a lot of money, Barker. It'll be well spent. And suppose I don't agree? Why, in that case, and Barker laughed softly, you'll understand just why I spent so much money. You might as well come in and not put up a useless argument, Captain. You'll gain nothing. Every white man aboard here now is in with me. If you stick out, it'll be just too bad for you. That's all. Greg looked up at him with a flashing smile. You don't think the men would mutiny, do you? Change your tune, Captain, said Barker abruptly. His lean, hard features became very purposeful and downright. This is nothing to joke about. I've come clean. Here is your chance. Here and now. What's the answer? Do we work together or not? We do not, said Greg, a hand slipping into his jacket pocket. I'll take over this trick box and its contents as the property of the owners. Don't forget that I am master here. Barker's keen eyes narrowed. That's what I figured, he said slowly. And that's why I took the cartridges out of that gun under your mattress while you were gone today. All right, Saunders. Greg came to his feet, pressed the trigger of the pistol in his pocket. It clicked emptily. Barker stood there grinning at him. The cabin door opened, and the hulking Saunders came in and stood waiting. Our good skipper, said Barker, is working for the Chinese syndicate that chartered this lousy ship, Saunders. 2 of them are Chinese at all events. Now, just what shall we do with the upright skipper chief? Do what we planned, said Saunders. Right. Barker's hand slipped down to his own pocket. You! Swift as a flash, Greg fell forward on his hands. His right foot drove out and up, behind him, with fearful force. Saunders, struck in the breast, was knocked backward into the passageway. Greg was no such fool as to come upright and face the pistol Barker was jerking out. The Frenchman, who had taught him this trick of savate, was a crafty man. Greg, as his blow behind him drove home, flung himself sidewise, and his outstretched hand gripped Barker's ankle, brought the man down floundering. His fist crashed into Barker's jaw twice. His gun knocked away. Barker lashed out with the ferocity of a wounded reptile. The 2 men, clinging together, fists driving like pistons, staggered slowly upright. Barker got in one deadly crack that sent Greg backward against the cabin wall, and leaped after it with a low and vicious blow under the belt. Greg writhed aside enough to take it on the hip, and swung his knee up under the chin. Barker only grunted and bore in for a clinch. Saunders lay prostrate out in the passage, groaning terribly. For a moment Greg hammered his man across the cabin, taking punishment himself as the iron fist smashed in kidney punches. His knee again, and Barker staggered. Greg drew back a pace and brought over a swift left to the angle of the jaw. His right followed, but missed its mark and crashed into Barker's mouth instead. The agent fell back against the wall, and a gasping oath burst with the blood from his cut lips. Greg was after him, instantly sent in a left that toppled Barker forward, and met him as he came with one sweet, clean crack fair at the jaw's angle. That crack did the business, and he knew it. Then a rush of feet from behind, he whirled. Too late. He had a swift glimpse of 3 men from forward, weapons in their hands, and that was all. A large spanner crashed down over his head, and he dropped like a log. 7. Is that done for him, Joe? Said one of the 3, turning Greg over and whistling at sight of the blood. Caved in his dome, all right. Barker staggered over to the berth and dropped his jacket above the cloisonné box with its gleaming green contents. Scarcely able to stand, yet he knew these men must not catch sight of what lay there. He turned groggily, stared down at the figure of Greg. Dead. Drag him out of here, he ordered. Clear out. Here is Saunders. He's bad off, said one of the 3. Looks like he's all stove in. Get him into his berth then, ordered Barker. and collapsed with a groan on a chair. "I am done up. Clear out. I'll be outside in a minute." His main incentive was to get them out at once and give himself a chance to put the box out of sight. In this he succeeded. Two of them dragged Greg out into the passage and on into his own cabin nearly opposite. There they paused. "Chuck him on the berth," said one, "and let's get us a drink. Plenty of liquor here if we can find it. The ship's ours now, so get busy." Greg's body was heaved unceremoniously into the bunk. Saunders, dragged into his own cabin, was left to groan and spit blood at his own sweet will. The three seamen plunged into lockers and chests, and their search for liquor was swiftly rewarded. Barker, meantime, set his battered self together, poured water lavishly over his bleeding face, and went to the berth. The open cloisonné box had been upset. Emeralds were strewn over the blankets in green glory. Jerking his jacket aside, Barker scooped up the shimmering stones and replaced them in the 3 troughs, closed the lid, and placed the cloisonné box in the larger wooden one. Then, tenderly feeling his swollen lips and jaw, he got out a cheroot, lit it, and left the cabin. A yell greeted him. The 3 men standing there, passing about a bottle, had just been joined by 2 others from forward, the 6th man being on the bridge. No one was on lookout, but this mattered nothing to them. "Have a drink, boss," cried out one, extending the bottle to Barker. He shook his head. "Not now, boys. Make the best of your good time. We'll need you at work again before long. You certainly turned up at the right time. W here is the cap'n, laying in his berth," answered one with a laugh. "Dead as a mackerel he is." Joe mashed his head in with a spanner. "Look at the blood on the deck." Barker nodded pleasantly. "And Saunders in his own cabin. Heard bad looks like." Barker passed into the cabin of the engineer and inspected him. Saunders was certainly badly off. He was unconscious, and blood dribbled from the corner of his mouth with every breath. Barker turned away with a shrug. "Clumsy fool. Well, he can wait until later." He sought the bridge. Behind him, the 5 seamen, emboldened by his disregard of their conduct, plunged into the cabin of Captain Carson, located the late skipper's supply of liquor, and proceeded to make themselves at home. Watson and the helmsman were talking low-voiced when Barker strode in upon them with a cheery greeting. "Get some supper, Watson, did you?" "Well, everything's in shape now. Did you see the cap'n?" queried Watson nervously. Barker chuckled. "You are the cap'n now, as far as that goes. Greg's dead. Somebody hit him with a spanner and scattered his brains." "Ha!" said Watson. "You look like somebody had hit you with a pile driver. Who done it, Greg?" "Exactly," returned Barker. "And now that the ship's ours, what about the course? You won't go to Singapore, naturally. So Greg's done for, is he?" Watson drew a deep breath. "Well, sir, that's great. I never looked for that. He was so cocksure. Why, about the course. We could turn right about and make the Sarawak River by morning. Could slip into Kuching or any of them ports. But we might better head down the west coast and hit one of the Dutch ports, so's you could get a packet boat to Batavia." "That sounds better," said Barker, with a nod of assent. "Right. I'll leave it to you then. By the way, Saunders is hurt laid out? I don't know a thing about engines. Do you?" "Lord, no!" exclaimed Watson in dismay. The seaman beside him spoke up. "I ain't got no blinkin' engine room ticket, sir, but I knows quite a bit about 'em. If you says the word, I'll slip down and keep an eye on the gauges and them yeller chinks." "Can do proper, sir." "Good," said Barker, relieved. The man departed, and Watson called after him to mind the signals. "We'll have to go on half speed when we head out of the passage," he explained to Barker, with an anxious air. "I can't trust any of that outfit, and I can't keep going day and night, both. You are no seaman. But you might spell me watching the course when we get past those 5-fathom patches. Though, we'll be all clear, and I can snatch an hour or so of sleep. Then I'll be good until tomorrow afternoon anyway." "Fair enough," commented Barker. "The watch are all drinking down below, but if you like I'll stop along here topside with you, Watson. When you hit clear water, give me the course and I can hold her to it, while you get a bit of sleep." So it was arranged, and by help of the steam steering gear, the Clipperton forged ahead all that night without a hint of trouble. Morning found her heading down the Borneo coast, definitely off her course for Singapore. Saunders, with 2 broken ribs, managed to crawl down to the engine room. Barker, who had turned in, was roused about sunrise by an unholy racket, and found Watson at it, driving the men back to work. They had been scattered all over the passage in drunken stupor, and with his jumpy nerves somewhat restored to order, Watson had assumed charge of the ship in no uncertain terms. After kicking the men forward, he went off cursing lustily to find the yellow steward who was hiding somewhere aft. Barker, who awakened plenty stiff and sore, descended to the forward well deck where the men were sluicing one another with buckets of water, and joined the party. Considerably refreshed, he returned to his cabin and dressed in leisurely fashion. There he remembered that the body of Gregg must be got out of the way, and his brain awakened to practical details as he crossed the passage. The place was a mess and must be cleaned up, and the bloodstains taken care of before they put into any port. He went on towards the bridge to give orders about it. 8 gust, flooding in at his port and striking Gregg's face, wakened him with its level beams. He opened his eyes. The sun was just tipping over the Bornean mountains that rose against the eastern horizon. Gregg swung his legs to the floor and sat up. Horrible pain assailed him in an overwhelming wave. He sat fighting down the recurrent swirls of agony, put a hand to his head, and found it caked with dried blood and enormously swollen. Not so bad as might have been. Then the swelling indicated that the skull had not been caved in, at least. He remembered everything now, felt the useless empty pistol in the pocket of his torn jacket, and sat for a little in a daze of despair. Barker had been too clever for him after all. Then voices pierced to his flagging consciousness and roused him. He heard Watson out in the passage, cursing the men for drunken swine and booting them forward. He waited expectantly, but Watson did not enter his cabin. "Damn you, move!" he caught Watson's voice. "I am in command here, and you wharf rats had better realize it." "That's better. Forward with you, Watson in command." Was he? Gregg laughed shakily and came to his feet. He swayed for an instant, caught himself, crossed to where his water bottle was slung in its rack, and drank the warm, insipid fluid thirstily. He dumped the remainder over his head, and this cleared his fogged brain considerably. He stood for a moment taking stock. He was fearfully weak. His head was a jarring, aching mass of hurt. Still he was alive, and they had evidently thought him dead. And he had the empty pistol. What was more, there were cartridges in the captain's cabin. Extra cartridges. The voices and sounds had died away outside. Going to the door, Gregg pulled it open and glanced out. The passage was empty. The door of Captain Carson's cabin stood ajar. He passed out and went to the other cabin. Twice he nearly collapsed, and walking was a fearful effort, but he got there. The place was a mess. A glance around told him that the men had found Carson's liquor. A bottle of whiskey nearly empty stood on the desk, and Gregg caught at it, dumped the fiery fluid down his throat. This pulled him together. As he stood, he heard a door slam, heard a step outside. Gregg chuckled grimly as he heard Barker depart for the bridge, and then he began his search for the cartridges. In a moment he had located them. "I've got one chance. Just one chance," he reflected, as he slipped them into the heavy pistol. "If I can jump 'em before they realize I am alive, well and good. Otherwise it's all off. And Barker's the one man to fear, too," he reflected swiftly. If he went straight up to the bridge by either forward ladder, they would see him ascending. That would be rank folly. But going aft along the passage, he could gain the bridge by the after ladder and come on Barker from behind. There lay his sole chance of success. He was alone, extremely shaky, and, except for the pistol, helpless. If he could pull himself up by his own bootstraps, he might win out yet, but it meant a pull. Another thought struck him, a weapon that might help his game. He entered Barker's cabin. Presently he headed aft. His right hand held the pistol, in his left hand was the cloisonné box, shimmering with its splendid color in the sunlight. He realized perfectly that he must stake everything on one throw of the dice, one grim and merciless cast. Up on the bridge, Barker and Watson stood talking for a while, left the wheelhouse by the starboard door, and headed for the side ladder, descending to the deck below. Then Barker whirled, with one low amazed oath, his hand jerking to his pocket. There, at the port side of the bridge, stood Greg. His left hand, extended over the rail, held the glittering cloisonné box. A pistol was in his right hand. "Careful, you," warned his voice. "Hands up, both of you. Over it goes. Barker, if you try any tricks." A frightful cry broke from Barker as he realized that the fortune for which he had planned and schemed and killed hung there above the depths. Watson, white as a sheet, caught at the handrail, staring at Greg as at a ghost. Barker was flung off his keen mental balance, just as Greg had figured he would be. "Hands up, I said," barked Greg. Blind fury seized upon Barker. His fingers closed about the pistol in his pocket, and he pressed the trigger. Two reports blended almost as one, but that from Greg's pistol was the foremost. Barker whirled about and collapsed. His bullet struck the pipe rail under Greg's left hand. The cloisonné box slipped away and was gone. Greg clutched after it and missed. From the wheelhouse burst the seaman Joe, the same who had smashed Greg over the head the previous night. He came with a rush, but a bullet crashed into his chest, and he fell on his face and slid over against the rail, almost touching Greg's feet. "Hands up, Watson." Watson obeyed. Greg strode over to him, grim-faced, and patted his pockets, then took out a pistol. It was his own lost weapon. "So," he observed, "you yellow dog, you are done. Get below and stay there. Send the steward here, and do it quick." Watson went scrambling down the ladder, completely crushed, terror in his white face. Voices and a scramble of feet sounded. Greg went to the bridge rail and looked down at the men below. They were staring up, gathered for a rush at either ladder, struck speechless by the sight of him there. He laughed grimly as he lifted the two pistols, one in each hand. "One of you report up here for duty, and smart about it, you limey. The rest of you get forward and stay there. Want to argue it?" One man threw up a pistol. Greg shot twice, mercilessly, and the man crumpled, his weapon unfired. With a yell of terror, the survivors broke. The man Limey slowly mounted, the latter frozen with fright. "Got a gun, have you?" snapped Greg, and frisked him as he mounted. "All right. There is a smoke 2 points. To starboard, change the course to head for it. Then break out an ensign and send it aloft upside down. Then get back to the wheel. Move!" With a whine of terror, the man obeyed. Presently the yellow steward came up the ladder. He was shaking tremulous, his saffron features contorted with fright as he carried a tray. "Hello, Wing," Greg gave him a cheery greeting. "Breakfast, eh? That's good. Now you slip down to Mr. Barker's cabin. There is a pile of green stones on his berth. Savvy. Gather them all up in the blanket, make a bundle of it, and fetch the bundle here. Savvy?" "Me savvy plenty good, sare," chattered the Celestial, and fled below. Greg ignored the tray for the moment. He walked over to the body of Barker. Not daring to stoop, he turned over the body with his foot and saw that his bullet had smashed the man's shoulder. He kicked Barker's pistol, and the weapon flew out and jumped over the side. "You limey," ordered Greg. Lay forward here and get a bandage about this man's wound, so he won't bleed to death. First, however, put this tray in the wheelhouse." "Aye, sir," came the hurried response. Presently Greg was sitting on the cushioned berth behind the wheel. At his side was a blanket bundle, and he sipped his coffee with appreciation as the Clipperton, flying her distress signal, steamed at full speed towards the ship now lifting above the horizon. Greg thought of Saunders down in the engine room and chuckled. "Saunders will get a surprise," he observed whimsically, "and so will the owners when I show up with the green stones all intact. Too bad that box went overboard, but when you haul yourself up by your bootstraps, something is liable to bust." And the Clipperton steamed on, with dead men alow and aloft, and a blazing-eyed ghost in command. End of The Box in the Hold by H. Bedford Jones.
If you found this story interesting, take a moment to support the channel. Hit subscribe, click the bell icon so you're notified of new stories, leave a comment and give the video a thumbs up. Share it on your socials if you think others might enjoy detective stories. And if you'd like to go a step further in reviving these forgotten horrors, you can click the Super Thanks button below or become a member of the channel. With your support, these dusty old stories may see the light once more.